Then his decision to render punishment o textoi acute muritra longo, Rephaim 778. The Amalekites, who had escaped into Mount Seir. The Simeonites then took over this territory. 1 ch 4. 41-43. 4. A post-exilic descendant of David. 1 ch 3. 5, 9, 10, 21. 5. An official in Jerusalem who helped on Nehemiah's project of repairing Jerusalem's wall. Son of Hur. Eni 3. 9. Rephaim Rethamiddle.im. A tall people or tribe. There is uncertainty as to the meaning and origin of the name. Likely, they were called Rephaim because of being descendants of a man named Rephah. At 2 Samuel 21. 16 hectares middle.ra. Literally, the Rephah seems to employ the father's name to stand for the entire giant race. At some early period the Rephaim evidently dwelt east of the Dead Sea. The Moabites, who dispossessed them, referred to the Rephaim as Imim, frightful things. The Ammonites called them Zamzumim, possibly from a root meaning have in mind. Scheme. 2. 10, 11, 19, 20. When King Chedorlaomer of Elam came to fight 5 rebellious kings near the Dead Sea, taking Lot captive, he defeated the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim. GE 14. 1, 5. This locates the Rephaim at that time in Bashan, east of the Jordan. Shortly thereafter God said that he would give Abraham's descendants the promised land, which included territory where the Rephaim lived. GE 15. 18-20. More than 400 years later, just before Israel entered Canaan, the land of the Rephaim was still identified with Bashan. There the Israelites defeated Og the king of Bashan. The 3. 3, 11, 13. Jos 12. 4. 13. 12, who alone remained of what was left of the Rephaim. It is uncertain whether this means that he was the last king of the Rephaim or that he was the last of the Rephaim in that section, for Rephaim were shortly found W of the Jordan. In the Promised Land the Israelites had problems with the Rephaim, for some of them persisted in the forests of the mountainous region of Ephraim. The sons of Joseph were afraid to drive them away. Jos 17. 14-18. When David was fighting the Philistines, he and his servants struck down 4 men born to the Rephaim in Gath. One of them was described as a man of extraordinary size, whose fingers and toes were in 6s. 24. The description of their armor indicates that they were all men of great stature. One of these was Lami, the brother of Goliath the Gittite. 1 ch 20. 4-8. This Goliath, whom David killed, was in height 6 cubits and a span 2.9 meters, 9.5 feet. 1 to 17. 4-7. The account at 2 Samuel 21. 16-22 reads Goliath, instead of the brother of Goliath, as at 1 Chronicles 20. 5, which may indicate that there were 2 Goliaths. See Goliath. The Hebrew Rethamiddle.im is used in another sense in the Bible. Sometimes it clearly applies, not to a specific people, but to those who are dead. Linking the word to a root meaning drop down, relax, some scholars conclude that it means sunken, powerless ones. In texts where it has this sense, the New World Translation renders it those impotent in death, and many other translations use renderings such as dead things, deceased, and dead. Job 26. 5. PS 88. 10. PR 2. 18. 9. 18. 21. 16. Isla 14. 9. 26. 14, 19. Rephaim, low plain of. A broad plain or valley near Jerusalem. Presumably it got its name from the tall people named the Rephaim who must have lived there at one time. It is listed as a boundary between the territories of Judah and Benjamin. Jos 15. 1, 8. 18. 11, 16. At its northern end was a mountain or a ridge that faced the valley of Hinnom. The traditional identification for the lower plain of Rephaim is the plain of the Baca to the south of the Temple Mount. It descends for about 1.5 kilometers 1 mi and then narrows into the Wadi el-Werd Nihal Rephaim. The plain's fertility is a 17. 5 as well as its proximity to Jerusalem and Bethlehem would have made it desirable to the Philistines. 2 Sa 23. 13, 14. 1 Ch 11. 15-19 After David had been anointed as king over Israel, the Philistines made raids in the lower plain of Rephaim. David followed Otex to Acute Miritra Longo, reproach 779 from the Red Sea to Mount Sinai. Upon leaving the wilderness of Sin, they encamped at Dophka, then Elash, and finally Rephidim. X 17. 1. New 33. 12-14 Lacking water at Rephidim, the people complained and quarreled with Moses. At God's direction Moses took some of the older men to the rock in Horeb, evidently the mountainous region of Horeb, not Mount Horeb, and struck a rock with his rod. Water flowed, apparently reaching to the people camped in Rephidim. X 17. 2-7. The Amalekites attacked the Israelites in Rephidim, but with Joshua leading in the fighting, God's people vanquished the attackers. X 17. 8-16 The placement of the account in the record indicates that it was while the Israelites were at Rephidim that Moses' father-in-law brought Zipporah and her 2 sons to Moses and suggested that he select chiefs to aid in judging the people. X 18. 1-27. The exact location of Rephidim is uncertain. The various locations offered by geographers have been determined in accord with their understanding as to the route the Israelites traveled from the wilderness of Sin to Mount Sinai. Many modern geographers identify Rephidim with the site in Wadi Rafayed, not far to the MW of the traditional location of Mount Sinai. Adjacent to the wadi is a hill of the same name, on which Moses might have stood with arms elevated during the battle with the Amalekites. Reproach, defamation, disgrace, or scorn, whether for just cause or not. Commonly translated from the Greek noun o middle dot ne middle dot di middle dot smos and onidos and the Hebrew noun she middle dot par. Compare GE 30. 23. PS 69. 9. Lu 1. 25. Row 15. 3. Causes for reproach could, of course, vary according to circumstances. For an Israelite male to be uncircumcised during the period of the law covenant would be cause for reproach. Compare JG 14. 3. Thus when all the males born during the wilderness journey were finally circumcised just after the crossing of the Jordan, Jehovah stated, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from off you." Jos 5. 2-9 Since the evidence indicates that the Egyptians practiced circumcision, this may mean that now the Egyptians would have no basis for reproaching Israel, because so many of its males were uncircumcised. J 9. 25, 26. See circumcision. On the other hand, circumcision was a sign of the covenant between Jehovah and Abraham's seed. GE 17. 9-11 Now, by this circumcision of the new generation that had grown up in the wilderness, the older generation having died there, circumcision could point to a reaffirming of their covenant relationship with God. The 40 years of wandering having ended, God was also showing them his favor. He had introduced them into the promised land and would now enable them to conquer it. Therefore any past Egyptian taunts, or reproach, because of what may have seemed to the Egyptians to be inability of Jehovah to bring Israel into a land of their own, were now proved false. Christians under the new covenant, whether Jew or Gentile, were not subject to reproach for uncircumcision. Row 2. 25-29. 3. 28-30. 4. 9-12. 1 Co 7. 18, 19. For Hebrew women, continuous singleness or widowhood is a 4. 1. 54. 4. Also barrenness GE 30. 23. Lu 1. 25, was viewed as a reproach. God's promise concerning the Abrahamic seed and its becoming like the grains of sand that are on the seashore doubtless contributed to this feeling. GE 22. 15-18. Compare 24. 59, 60. By contrast, the Apostle Paul commended singleness on the part of both men and women, where the motive was service to God with undivided attention, and he said of the widow that she is happier if she remains as she is, according to my opinion. 1 Co 7. 25-28, 32-40. Compare Mount 19. 10-12. Wrongs such as idolatry, adultery, thievery, and other types of immorality, however, were constant in being cause for reproach, as was all disloyalty to God. 2-13. 13. PR 6. 32, 33. Row 1. 18-32. 2. 17-24. Those seeking God's approval cannot be o textui acute miritra longo, reproved 780 brought upon Jehovah. Therefore, in restoring the Israelites on the basis of their repentance, Jehovah cleared his name of such reproach. S 36. 15, 20, 21, 30-36. Whenever situations arise that make it appear that God has seemingly forsaken his people, others conclude that he is not protecting or blessing them, and so they heap reproach upon them. PS 31. 9-11. 42. 10. 74. 10, 11. 79. 4, 5. 102. 8, 9. Joe 2. 17-19. But eventually Jehovah demonstrates his saving acts and thereby silences those who reproach. Anyone. 3. 2. 17. 4. 4. 6. 16. Bearing reproach for sake of Christ. Also, in carrying out their commission, Jehovah's servants have been reproached by those to whom they were sent. It was the experience of Jeremiah 6. 10. 15. 15-18. 20. 8, of Christ Jesus Mount 27. 44. Mr. 15. 32. Row 15. 3, and of his followers Heb 10. 33. An individual who is reproached for the sake of Christ has reason for rejoicing, because his continued faithfulness under such reproach leads to great reward in the heavens. Mount 5. 11. Lu 6. 22, 23 and constitutes a proof of his having God's Spirit. 1 Pe 4. 14 Therefore, reproach should not be feared. To those knowing righteousness, Jehovah said, do not be afraid of the reproach of mortal men, and do not be struck with terror just because of their abusive words. Isra 51. 7. Although knowing the great reproach that would come upon him, Jesus voluntarily submitted to the doing of his Father's will to the point of dying a shameful death on a torture stake. Isra 53. 3-7. Joe 10. 17, 18. Hope 12. 2. 13. 12, 13 To render good to others, he did not seek to please himself but was willing to take reproach from persons who by word and deed reproached Jehovah God. The Apostle Paul pointed to that when highlighting the right attitude towards spiritually weak ones. We, though, who are strong ought to bear the weaknesses of those not strong, and not to be pleasing ourselves. Let each of us please his neighbor in what is good for his upbuilding. For even the Christ did not please himself. But just as it is written, the reproaches of those who are approaching you have fallen upon me. Row 15. 1-3 In the previous chapter row 14, Paul had discussed the weaknesses of some Christians who had conscientious scruples regarding certain foods or the observance of a certain day. He had shown the need to avoid being a cause for stumbling such ones and the need to build them up. This would likely mean that those strong in understanding, faith, and conscience would have to restrict themselves in the exercise of their rights, and this might be somewhat unpleasant to them. Nevertheless, they must bear the verb here, allowing both the sense of carry and put up with or endure. Compare 6. 2. Read 2. To whatever burdens such weaknesses might cause them, imitating Christ. Compare Mount 17. 17-20. Also Moses' expression at New 11. 10-15. Additionally, they should not simply forge ahead in their own pursuit of God's favor, blessings, and rewards, while pushing aside these spiritually weak ones as an encumbrance or allowing them to be lopped off by the adversary because of lack of consideration and help from these strong ones. Compare 1 Co 9. 19-23. 10. 23-33. Avoid bringing reproach by wrongdoing. While expecting reproach for righteousness' sake, a Christian should never suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a busybody in other people's matters. 1 Pe 4. 15, 16. One of the qualifications for an overseer in the Christian congregation is that he have a fine testimony from people on the outside, in order that he might not fall into reproach. This would prevent bringing dishonor to the position and would avoid the spread of unfavorable talk about true Christians, because of the conduct of one of the prominent members of the congregation. 1 T 3. 7. Reproof. That which is designed to convince others of their having erred, in order to move them to acknowledge o texto e acute miritra longo. Reshef 781. Resentment against the erring brother were not to be allowed to fester. He was to be reproved with a view to recovering him from sin. Failure to discharge this moral responsibility could contribute towards further sin, and the person who held back from reproving his associate would share responsibility for such sin. Compare Mount 18. 15. At times, elders representative of the congregation must reprove serious wrongdoers, even doing so in the presence of others who have knowledge of the sinful course. Such reproof is not reserved only for those who show a receptiveness to it. Elders are also called on to reprove those who contradict and to reprove with severity those who are unruly and profitless talkers. 1 T 5. 20. T 1. 9, 10, 13. Although reproof can benefit those who receive it, the efforts of the reprover are not always appreciated. Thus Proverbs 9. 7, 8 warns. He that is correcting the ridiculer is taking to himself dishonor, and he that is giving a reproof to someone wicked. A defect in him. Do not reprove a ridiculer, that he may not hate you. Give a reproof to a wise person and he will love you. Proper attitude. Since the scriptures are inspired of God, all reproof solidly based on them is really reproof from him. 2 T 3. 16. Jehovah's reproof is an expression of love, not to be abhorred or rejected. PR 3. 11, 12. As head of the Christian congregation, Jesus Christ, in affection for its members, sees to it that needed reproof is given through spiritually qualified men. We 3. 14, 19. Wise ones appreciate that the reproofs of discipline are the way of life. PR 6. 23. The sinful human tendency is to resent reproof and the human servant through whom it may be given. But yielding to this tendency degrades one to the level of an unreasoning beast lacking moral discrimination. As the inspired proverb expresses it, a hatter of reproof is unreasoning. PR 12. 1. In contrast, the psalmist David, who was himself repeatedly reproved, wrote, Should the righteous one strike me, it would be a loving kindness. And should he reprove me, it would be oil upon the head, which my head would not want to refuse. PS 141. 5. Reptiles. A reptile is a cold-blooded, vertebrate, air-breathing animal. The Hebrew term for reptiles comes from the verb zamidl.chel, meaning glide. As stated at Deuteronomy 32. 24, among the things that would bring trouble upon idolatrous Israel was the venom of reptiles of the dust, evidently referring there to poisonous snakes. Compare Jer 8. 17. At Micah 7. 17, the nations that are overwhelmed by God's power are spoken of as coming out of their defensive positions like excited reptiles. In addition to serpents, other reptiles mentioned in the Bible are the chameleon, the gecko and other lizards. See comments under their individual names. Repurchase, repurchaser. The Hebrew verb gamidl.al, appearing first in Genesis 48. 16. Recover, also has the meaning of repurchase or redeem, that is, to recover, redeem, or buy back the person, property, or inheritance of the next of kin. It was also used with reference to a blood avenger. PS 74. 2. ISLA 43. 1. The next of kin having the obligation of being a repurchaser heb. Go middle.l evidently fell in this order. 1. Brother, 2. Uncle, 3. Son of an uncle, 4. Any other male blood relative of the family. LA 25. 48. 49. Compare the order in New 27. 5-11. See Avenger of Blood. Under the Mosaic Law, if an Israelite, because of economic circumstances, had sold himself into slavery, the repurchaser could buy him back out of slavery. Law 25. 47-54 Or, if he had sold his land inheritance, his repurchaser could buy back the property, and he could return to his possession. Law 25. 25-27 However, no thing devoted to destruction, not even a man's life, could be repurchased. Law 27. 21, 28, 29. See devoted thing. An example of the transaction of repurchase by Gomidal.L is found in the book O Textoi Acute Miritra Longo, Resident 782 Resident. See Alien Resident. Resinous tree Heb. Gopher. A tree whose wood Noah used in the construction of the ark, but which cannot be identified with any degree of certainty. GE 6. 14 The King James Version simply transliterates the Hebrew name. On the basis of the similarity between the Hebrew name and the Hebrew term for tar pitch, KJ. Heb. KO for some related to some kind of resinous tree. Scholars generally favor the cypress, which is a very durable tree, extremely resistant to decay. See cypress. Respect. The giving of particular attention or deference to one judged worthy of esteem. A recognition and due regard for a thing or, especially, for another person, his qualities, achievements, office, position, or authority. To manifest respect is to honor. Various original language words convey the thought of according to others honor, respect, or wholesome fear. See fear. Honor. Toward Jehovah and his representatives. By reason of his being creator, Jehovah God is worthy of the greatest honor from all his intelligent creatures. 4. 11 Such honor calls for individuals to render faithful obedience to him, obedience based on love for him and an appreciation for what he has done in their behalf. L1. 6. 1 Joe 5. 3 It also includes the use of one's valuable things on behalf of true worship. PR 3. 9. One who appropriates to himself that which belongs to the Creator shows disrespect for sacred things. This was done by Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of High Priest Eli. They seized the best of every offering made to Jehovah. And Eli, by failing to take firm measures against his sons for this, honored them more than Jehovah. 1 So 2. 12-17, 27-29. Whereas the honor given by men to Jehovah God is manifested by faithful obedience to him in furthering the interests of his worship, God honors humans by blessing and rewarding them. 1 So 2. 30 Thus King David, who served Jehovah faithfully and desired to build a temple for housing the sacred Ark of the Covenant, was honored or rewarded with a covenant for a kingdom. 2 So 7. 1-16. 1 Ch 17. 1-14. As Jehovah's spokesmen, the prophets, especially God's Son Jesus Christ, were deserving of respect. But instead of being accorded such by the Israelites, they were abused verbally and physically, even to the point of being put to death. Israel's disrespect for Jehovah's representatives reached its climax in their killing his son. For this reason Jehovah used the Roman armies to execute his vengeance upon unfaithful Jerusalem in 70 CE Mount 21. 33-44. Mr. 12. 1-9. Lu 20. 9-16. Compare Joe